This is Fresh Courage with Jason Rogers, where we dive deep into the stories of inspiring individuals to gain your own fresh courage. Awesome. Mike Allen, thanks so much for sitting here and joining me today on Fresh Courage with Jason Rogers. It's a pleasure to have you here, but not only just to have you here today, but to have known you and gotten to know you over the last several months.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So for the listeners and the viewers here, Mike Allen is currently one of the co-founders of Heare Brotherhood company, one of Utah's fastest growing men's wellness companies. And I've had the privilege of being a part of helping them out and being a part of the founding team, which is awesome. Mike also has an extensive background in branding, worked in the corporate world and climbed that corporate ladder for some time, and was a key member on the DoorDash team just a few years ago, and was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to now do some more purposeful work. And him and his wife Erin are just incredible people. So
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
So Mike, I know I've talked to you over the last few months about my passion project, which is Fresh Courage, and what I wanted to create, and in highlighting individuals who have demonstrated fresh courage in their life, who have done some extraordinary things, that have some stories that could potentially be stories that other people can draw from and draw inspiration, courage, and I certainly think that your story is worthy of being heard. So if you wouldn't mind, Mike, just taking us back to kind of where it started. You grew up in California, is that right? Or?
No, actually, I was born in Arizona.
Okay.
But then grew up in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
But we did move to California later and spent some years there.
I already butchered your bio here.
It's all good. I grew up in Salt Lake, like kind of near the Avenues area, not far from downtown, and just had my whole childhood and adolescence and everything there in the same house, kind of pretty stable, but when I was like 1 or 2 years old, my parents divorced, and I have 4 older sisters and my mom. And so it was the 5 women and me in my childhood, right? That was the environment.
The prince.
Yeah, I was the little prince. No, I get grief for that a lot. But what's interesting is my next older sister was a total tomboy. So it was kind of like I had a brother until she hit maybe 13 or so, and then she suddenly was like, oh, I'm going to embrace my more feminine side. Yep. And it was kind of this weird transition, and it was a great transition. It was just weird for me to be like, oh, okay.
Where's my sidekick?
Yeah, she was like, we would box and throw a football around and play the same toys, like the G.I. Joes and the He-Man and that kind of stuff. So I kind of had that like brotherly type influence, or the more stereotypical like brother relationship, I guess. But anyway, when I was about 7 years old, my mom met my stepdad, who joined the family. And imagine this, like he's 47 years old, has never been married, and then marries my mom, who has 5 kids with 4 girls who are all like teenager ages. And they had been through more than one divorce in the past. And so we talk about courage. Yeah. I look at my stepdad, and I just call him my dad. I welcomed him with open arms, because I was like,
beautiful,
another guy in the house, and he was just really warm and really like steady and calm, and we had a lot of energy with my sisters. The conversations would just get louder and louder, and I would sort of get quieter and quieter.
It seems like that with females. I was embraced by a home of females also.
Yeah. So. That's like a common link between many of us in the brotherhood, like the founding team. Yeah. We all have like a lot of sisters. I don't know what
I joke.
What
I had 3 moms.
Oh, yeah.
My grandmother, my mom, and my older sister.
Nice.
So anyways, I interrupt, but
no, you're good. That's just kind of a funny common theme we've discovered. But when he joined our family, he was he was not welcomed by all of us, right? Like I was very eager to like have a relationship and whatever, have a dad in the home. My sisters, I mean, one of them didn't talk to him for like a year, like just ignored him the whole time, like did not talk to him. And I don't have a ton of memories of when I was, 7, 6, 8, whatever. Like my memories are only few and far between, but I remember him talking to our whole family after they got married, or maybe it was right before they were going to get married, sometime around then. And it was so cool because he just sat down with everyone and he said, look, I'm not going to try to be something I'm not. I'm not going to try to impose myself as your father.
Yeah.
He's like, but I love your mom and I'm going to be here for her and I'm committed to that. And I would love to be here for you and I'd love to be your friend. But he just like put it
awesome.
to the kids, like the ball's in your court kind of thing. But like, I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I was such a cool thing that he did.
Yeah.
And crazy that like, I that impacted me as a 7-year-old or however old I was, enough that I remember it still, and I'm sure I'm getting the words wrong or whatever, but I remember the spirit of it and the intention of it. It was really cool. So he's just been an incredible, stable, like influence in my life. And that people, again, on the topic of courage, people said when they found out he was about to marry into this family that had all this trauma and baggage and whatever, they're
warning
like,
sign, right?
They're like, you're either crazy or you're inspired.
Yeah.
Or maybe both. Yeah. So, and he jokes, he's like, I still am not sure which it was.
That's so funny. That reminds me a lot of my dad. My dad married for the first time in his mid-40s. And I'm sure he may have gotten some kind of guidance or opinions from others. Like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Right. But that's incredible. So you then from Salt Lake, right? You move around a bit. And then you go from there and you go to California or
so
Arizona?
I went to first I went to BYU, so I'm from Salt Lake to Provo. Served a mission in Sao Paulo, Brazil for 2 years, which was amazing experience, challenging, awesome, all of it. The extremes, the spectrum of emotions and of all of that. And came back from that and continued at BYU, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study, what I wanted to do with my life. And I had dabbled in a few different things, even including like, maybe like med school, or maybe for some reason I had it in my head like maybe I'd be an ophthalmologist, or I don't know, right? Like you just
a good safe job,
right? So that's like
gives me some longevity.
Yeah, it's going to be reliable. I can raise a family. But my tendency was always towards the visual arts. Like that's what I did a lot of, and music a bit too. But I did a lot of arts in high school. I just really loved it. Even as a kid, I would like draw all the time. My kids or my friends would like at recess run and play outside, and sometimes I would just stay and like make a little flip book on a Post-it pad, like make a little animation.
That's
and just like
so cool.
I just loved doing that stuff, like creating those kinds of things. Honestly, in some ways it was kind of an outlet. I would sometimes draw just like these kind of gnarly scenes of, I don't know, fights or wars or whatever. It was sort of
your
like
mini therapy right there.
Yeah, it was my art therapy. And my parents would be like, what did you draw
little
there?
Johnny and little Billy are shooting each other.
Yeah, exactly. And I grew up on all the action movies of the 80s and the 90s. So I would watch, Schwarzenegger and Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme and all that stuff. Those were all my heroes, so I would just draw stuff like that. Superheroes, I loved drawing like Spider-Man. Anyway, so the arts were kind of a thing that I knew was something I always wanted to like have be a part of my life. But in college, I thought, I can't be an art major, because I just had this false assumption that I wouldn't be able to like raise a family and make a living doing that. And so I resisted that a lot. And then after my mission, I got back and I was kind of exploring all these different things. And it just dawned on me, like, why am I fighting what I actually want to be doing? I was taking side classes of like figure drawing and, other like art classes.
Those
while
were like
I
your
was
favorite probably.
Yeah. And they were the best ones. But I was thinking like, I just have to do this on the side because whatever. So I finally was just like, you know what, I'm just going to lean into this and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I applied to the arts program and I got in, still not knowing even about what design was or branding or anything. I was just like, something in this territory. So I started taking all the foundational art classes, and they were cool. Like, I mean, my college experience really changed at that point because I just loved what I was learning and experiencing and doing. And then it was a ways into those classes that I caught wind of, like, oh, there's this whole graphic design thing.
Right.
And I was like, oh, is that like making billboards? What is that? Like, I really, or like, making t-shirts and stuff. And so I was like, well, maybe that's something to explore. And I started to talk to more people and learn more about it, and found out that, like, oh, this is actually perfect for me, because it felt safer than just becoming a fine artist.
Yep.
But I felt like I still got to have that visual expression and the craft, but it's in support of, you can have, a great career, and, it just felt more stable, but kind of in that space. And so it just felt like this really good fit. And then the deeper I got into design, the more I realized, like, this is a really cool discipline in and of itself, and I started to fall in love with typography and all the cool things about design. And so that's how I got into that.
So good.
And it was competitive to get in the program, and I feel like I just barely slid into that.
Not only was it, I'm sure, competitive to get in the program, it was competitive to get into BYU.
Oh yeah.
At that. Even today,
for
I'm
sure.
sure, but
it's harder now, I think.
Yeah.
But no, at the time, for sure. I mean, I was pretty good about, like, getting my schoolwork done and getting good grades. My test scores were like, okay, not amazing, but not terrible. So I managed to slide into BYU and to slide into that program.
I'm like, says the guy that didn't even finish the application to BYU, because I just knew. My dad's a BYU guy. He's like, you got to finish your application. I'm like, Dad, I got a 3.5, which it was great for me, but they won't even bat an eye at me at BYU with a 3.5, Dad. Like, it's not happening. Yeah. So that's awesome. So then you get into the program, you discover this avenue that you love. It's a little safer, but it also provided that outlet for you. Then you go out into the workforce and you get some really cool opportunities to then travel to some really cool places.
I was fortunate enough to get an internship at a studio called Pentagram in New York City, and people in the design community are familiar with that studio because it's got some of the design all-stars, contemporary design all-stars there, and that was just very humbling. I mean, I went there, I got the internship mostly because of the network that we had. My portfolio was okay, but it wasn't like outstanding at that time. I was between junior and senior year, but I got to go and do it, and it was just an incredible and challenging experience. I had to learn a lot fast in that setting.
I couldn't imagine.
I felt woefully inadequate in that experience, but it was really good education, and to just live in New York and have that experience and the exposure to the city and to all the cool art and culture and food and everything that had to offer. And so around that time, or before that, I had met Erin, and we started dating. And while I was in New York, I had kind of given her like a promise ring, like, we're going to get engaged, but I wasn't quite like
ready
fully. But when she came out to visit in New York, I proposed officially in the city, which was kind of cool.
That's cool.
So Erin and I have this whole story, which could be like its own episode, but we went through, like, we started dating, she dumped me, we got back together, but then she had already planned to move before we got back together. So we were long distance, and then she came back, and then I went to New York, and then we came back, and then we called off our wedding, and then we got engaged again, and then we finally got married. And so we'd just gone through the whole gamut of, like, heartbreak and healing and recovery, and just all the stages of how do you handle stress? How do you handle opposition? And it was so good in hindsight. Of course, at the time it was miserable, and well, those dark moments, right, were devastating. But we saw each other in sort of every scenario, and like our true colors, right? And by the time we finally were like, yes, we're getting married, and this is like, we're all in. it was like no surprises, you know, it's like totally.
You knew who each other were.
Yeah. Through the thick and thin.
It's interesting. I've heard you mention that story before.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit about Marissa and I, and us. I've known her since I was 6. And,
wow.
That's, you know, I've known
amazing.
her my whole life, pretty much. And then like we dated all through high school. And then when I got home from my mission, we were different people completely. We still loved each other. It was the hardest thing ever. When you love somebody, but it's not the right time, and you're not in the right place. And so I completely understand and empathize with that, and also with young people today that are going through that stage of life, which is kind of difficult. So you're in New York City.
Oh, right. So, came back from the internship. I finished school. We got married the summer after we graduated, and then we lived in Salt Lake for a couple of years. And I worked at a studio that was called Axiom at the time. Later, Struck Design acquired it, so it's now known as Struck. Really cool people, great clients. I got to work on some stuff with like Nacho Libre and like just random
pants.
Cool stuff. Yes, we got to do a whole style guide for it.
So
it was
good.
like one of the funnest projects ever. And then a few years in, I mean, we kind of had an eye towards New York and thought, oh, it'd be cool to go out there and work for a while. And things just weren't like materializing. You know, some kid in Utah is like throwing his portfolio across the country, and they're like, we've got a lot of designers right here that are really good. You know,
we're good. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, it was like a long shot. But there was finally one connection that sort of started to materialize into an opportunity. And it was only a 3-month contract to work at Johnson & Johnson in their New York office. It was called the Global Strategic Design Office, the GSDO, and they were doing cool work. I mean, for a big company like that, design just can have a huge impact, right?
Sure.
It's global. It's like how many SKUs, how many products are out there, and it was like design and branding, packaging. And so it seemed like an interesting and cool opportunity. And even though my wife and I we had our first child, by the way, so we had a 10-month-old, and we had moved to like a little duplex, and we thought, okay, we're just gonna settle in here.
Yeah.
And then this thing comes up, and it's like, what do we do?
Yeah, curveball.
And honestly, it was one of like the scariest decisions of my life to be like, okay, we're gonna move to this super expensive, crazy city with a baby.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people say, oh, New York's awesome.
Yeah.
But having kids there or like raising a family there, like that's a
different
whole
story.
Other animal. Yeah. But we had, you know, people that had done it that were friends of ours, and people that were living out there, and we had examples, you know, we had some mentors.
Yep.
We had some connections there that helped it feel more possible. And
cool.
And we decided to go for it. So we moved out to New York in 2008, months before the big crash of the whole financial market and the housing market and everything. Thankfully, we were just renting. It didn't really impact us.
Yeah.
My job stayed stable. I was there for 3 months initially on that first contract, but it turned into 4 years of working with them. So it panned out. It worked out.
Incredible.
We moved to a couple different apartments we were up in Washington Heights and Inwood, like way north side of Manhattan. So still on the island, but not in Times Square
in
or
the
whatever.
Thick of the island.
Yep.
For sure.
And just an amazing few years there. I mean, we had 2 more kids while we were there. We had this incredible community, friends that we have held dear to this day. Nikki Covington, we met him there.
Yeah.
Eric and Emily Orton. I don't know if you've met them yet, but they've just been an awesome. And many, many others, like real solid lifelong families. Because when you're living out there, like most people are not with their own families,
right.
Or their parents aren't nearby, or
right.
siblings or whatever. And so the community just like really comes together and helps each other out.
They need each other.
You need each other. Totally. Yeah.
When you need each other, you show up for each other.
Yeah.
You know, and you rely on one another, and that's really how community's built.
Yeah. I mean, we sometimes had holidays together when it's like, oh, we're not going to fly back home. What are you guys doing for Thanksgiving or whatever? So cool. And we'd share those kind of typical family moments. You'd share them with our friends that were out there. So really, really amazing experience. Just living there, raising a family there. I went from Johnson & Johnson to a branding agency called Profit, and that was awesome. I was there in New York for probably two plus years. And then an opportunity came up to transfer to San Francisco because they're a global agency. Yeah. They had an office in San Francisco, and we had 3 kids and we had a 4th on the way, and we were still in an apartment in Washington Heights, and without a backyard. And you're
like, it's time, we're outgrowing this box.
We were feeling the itch to like change things up. And so we looked around New York area, but then the San Francisco thing came up, and we were like, man, if we lived there, we could get to Utah so much easier, totally. And like
go see family and have it feel a little bit more grounded.
Yeah, totally. And so we decided to transfer over, and that initial move was super rough, actually. And we were like, we made a huge mistake.
What did we
do? Just all kinds of things went wrong.
Yep.
But we just kind of stuck it out and kept going. And then eventually things started getting better. And we really missed that sense of community we had. Mm-hmm. It took like a year to find that in the Bay Area.
California is a different place, though.
It is. Well, so we weren't in San Francisco. I mean, my job was there, but we lived in the East Bay in a town called Concord, which is right next to Walnut Creek. And so, and it was the shock of city life to suburb life. And suddenly we were pretty isolated as a family. Mm-hmm. And we'd go to the local park and like nobody's there.
No one's there.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But our kids were like, we have a park behind our house and it's called a backyard.
Yeah,
like that was a new concept to them.
Right.
And laundry in our house.
Our own house.
We didn't have to take the elevator down to the basement to do laundry every week, So anyway, we adapted though, and things went from pretty rough to getting a lot better. But then with my job, things started to go downhill. So it was like family was doing better, work was going downhill. Oof. And it reached a point where, I mean, we were having our 4th baby by then. And I was like searching for a new job, and it was kind of an intense time. But what came from that was finding DoorDash. I had interviewed at like Google and, all the big tech companies out there. And those just weren't panning out for me.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted like a particular kind of designer, and I was not fitting
their exact mold.
Right. Like product design, like building apps and all designing for apps. I was sort of like brand guy. And, but there was this perfect job description at some company that at the time I had barely heard of, which was DoorDash.
Yeah.
And I applied just blind. I didn't have any connections there or anything. And the hiring manager just saw my application, saw my portfolio, and we had a conversation and just immediately hit it off. Like such a cool person. And we made a connection, and I got the job. And this was 2017.
Yeah.
DoorDash was 4 years old by then. So it had been around, 250 employees, wasn't nothing, but not nearly what it became. Right. It just like grew crazy after that.
Yeah.
And so I got to work there and like do the branding. So like I started there, and they had like a version of the former version of the logo. And I was like, okay, what's our brand all about? And they had like a 1-pager. It's like, here's the logo, here's the red color, here's the font we use. That's it. Yeah. And I was like, okay, and that's what I was brought on to do, was like, let's establish
Give us some
the brand.
Identity.
Yeah. Like create the whole guideline, create the whole look and feel, and strategy is a part of that. Like getting clear on the brand's purpose and the core values and the attributes and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that was such a cool opportunity to build that out. And of course, in hindsight, I'm like, that was an incredible opportunity because it grew and became a household name and became the market leader and all the things that it wasn't at the time.
Right.
But it was like, we got to shape it and build it and then just see it like
blossom.
Explode. Yeah, it was. And suddenly it's, everywhere. And my mom's going to a restaurant and she's like, I saw your sticker in the window. And,
Good job,
and I'm like,
son.
yeah,
That's
awesome. It was really cool. Amazing opportunity. But my time at DoorDash was super volatile. I mean, ups and downs. A company growing that fast, and the changes of leadership and the changes of teams and everything, like it was pretty wild, and kind of took a toll on my like stability and mental wellness. I was doing some of the coolest stuff, and then some of the like dealing with some of the lamest stuff, day after day.
I feel like if anybody has ever worked in the corporate world, there's this, you feel this immense purpose for what you're doing because you're working with, a household name or something that is up and coming, or you love your product, but then you're also having to deal with all the other things that are unpleasant sometimes to deal with. And those things put pressure on us. Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about that. What were some of the pressures you were feeling at that time? Yeah. And what did you do to be able to overcome some of those pressures or challenges that you're going through mentally?
Sure. I mean, I'll share you've probably heard this story before, but this is the one that it was one of those kind of beauty for ashes moments. Yeah. I had a relationship with one manager in particular that started off really good and then just started to really decline the deeper we got into things, and misalignments, miscommunication, misunderstandings of like roles and where's the value in what I'm doing versus what the expectation of what I should have been doing, just all of the messiness. It just kind of was compounding and getting worse, and and it got to a point where, meanwhile, we also hired a new person that was like, oh, this is actually going to be my new manager, like my new boss was coming on. And so I kind of was in this point where, I got a fresh start coming. Yeah. Good. Cause I was not in a good place. One. Yeah. I read this article that said like a manager's influence or like a boss's influence has a greater impact on our mental health than like our therapist, all these other.
I believe it.
Yeah. I believe
it.
Totally. Right. It's like the day-to-day stress of that.
Who are you most accountable to during the working hours?
Yeah.
As your boss.
Yeah. You're spending the majority of your time with that person under that pressure with those. Perform. Totally. So I was not doing well in that environment and struggling, day in and day out, had moments of good days, bad days, whatever, and my family could sense it. They were feeling it. They were like, my wife was seeing that I was kind of having a hard time and trying to figure it out. And so this new hire was sort of like, okay, cool, fresh start. However, it was performance review time, and I was like, oh, I haven't had my review yet or whatever. And so we like set it up, and it turned into current boss that I was struggling with and new boss and me all in a room together at the same time. And we started doing the review, and it was like kind of like a nightmare experience for me, like all of my hopes of a fresh start were just crumbling. And I was literally like having a stress response. Like I was fight or flight mode, I was just like, I think I was like sweating, just sitting there as current boss is talking through like, here have been some of the issues and the struggles and whatever. And I'm just like, and I felt like I couldn't even, in that headspace I was in, I couldn't even like defend myself or explain like, oh, actually here's the value I'm bringing and here's what I've been, I just was like, I was in a total primal state.
You were paralyzed. You felt paralyzed.
Yeah. And I attempted to like say a couple things a couple times, and it just like fell flat. It didn't, it was really the worst meeting of my career, was that meeting. And so I think that was on a Friday, and I go home from that just totally in a funk, storm clouds over my head. And I get home to my wife, and I'm like, we put the kids to bed. She can tell I'm in a dark place. And we just sit down and talk, and I just like unload all of I tell her everything that happened
of the day,
and then everything that followed, which was all the fears of, I don't know if I need to find another job. And if that's the case, I don't want to go through that again in the Bay Area. Maybe we just need to leave. Where do we go? Are we going to move? Just all these big stressful decisions and all these fears. And meanwhile, it's kind of like hurting my self-confidence and my capabilities. For right. Sure. And so all that's at play. And I get it all out. And then she's just patiently like listening and holding space for me, and finally I'm done venting. And then she's like, can I say something? And I was like, of course.
Don't you just love it when they just listen and then they just say, can I have a second to talk?
Right. And then it's like, here comes.
It's a cliffhanger.
Totally. And so she's like, she gets this big smile on her face. And it was very like genuine. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to put on a front. Like I'm good.
Yeah.
It was like this heartfelt, just this smile and this warmth and this love that was just coming from her. And she said, Mike, this is great because it's going to push you to figure out what you really want to do, like what you really want to be doing. And I was so blown away by that response. Yeah. Because I thought she'd be like, we're going to figure this out.
Meet
like,
you in your primal state.
Yeah, totally. I was like, okay, I'm probably scaring her by all this stuff. She's probably scared and she's just trying to cope with it. And then we're going to get into problem solving mode and start looking for the next job and calling whatever, right?
Totally.
But instead she was like, this is an opportunity to really figure out like our lives, our priorities, what we really care about. How do we really want to be living?
Yep.
And that weekend turned into this blue sky, like what if, like let's just explore the possibilities. Where do we want to live? And not because of a job, but like where do we want to be?
Yeah.
And like let's
regardless
set aside
of all of those things.
Right.
What do we want to do?
Totally. Yeah. And we started writing, like, let's just write the most important things to us. And we started writing it out, like family, like we want more time in nature. We want, these kinds of memories and and we just wrote it out and then we compared notes and it was like, yep, these align. And then some didn't, but it was like, cool, I can support you in that. You can support me in this. And, and that exercise led to more questions and talking and exploring. And we started like writing out our future together. It was like, here's all the things that could happen. And, it was this incredible creation, like spiritual creation experience. Awesome. And and then by the time Sunday hit, I had this like epiphany moment where I was like, everything that we just did is basically the exercises and the process I go through with brands to figure out their purpose and their values and their mission.
Right.
I was like, we just did that for us.
For our family.
Yeah. And it was so cool because I had been like, oh, I don't know how much meaning am I getting from like doing design work and is it really making a difference and and all these things that I'd learned along the way suddenly applied to the thing that was most important to my life, which was my family. Right. And,
so cool.
and my own life. And I was like, I started like weeping when I had this realization, like there was purpose in all of that. And it's being applied now. And then like, who knows where it's going to take us in the future, but it was just this bright, awesome, optimistic potential future. And so that's the state I was in when I went back to the office on Monday. It was almost like, I didn't really care.
I'm Superman, baby. Let's go.
I mean, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what was going to happen. We weren't like, okay, we're going to move next, whatever. But it was just like, we got aligned on the most important things that honestly transcend like, what's the specific job I'm in?
Yep.
What's the specific city we live in? Right. It just like was bigger idea stuff than that. But then I got back to work and new boss that was in that meeting took me aside and was like, hey, that was kind of weird. I'm just like, let's just, figure it out, like start fresh. Like I'll kind of work with you and see how things go and we'll figure it out as we go. And so it was sort of that best of both worlds. I had to get pushed to that low point in order to like for all this stuff to be created from it. But then I also was kind of spared the like what would have been difficult experience of, okay, now we're gonna whatever hash this out and
totally
are you gonna stay with the company or not? Do you need to start looking for a new job? All that stuff. And then from there, though, my experience at DoorDash just got better and better. I actually had like another boss after that and one more after that. And it just, each one, like just incredible relationships, incredible people. I felt like I was doing some of the best work of my career. And then the pandemic hit in the middle of some of those transitions, right? And so what was already a rapidly growing business, it was like just throwing gasoline on it. Every restaurant in the country was like, we need to be on DoorDash. Yeah. I mean, our CEO, Tony, literally had everybody stop their normal job and just help get restaurants on the platform because there was like a process they had to go through to get on. He was like, we need every employee at this company getting restaurants on the platform. It was pretty wild.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So
unreal.
So that happened. And after we were all, acclimating to working from home and whatever, our family, like, we just felt like pulled to move back closer to home, closer to Utah. And that's when I brought up the, like, hey, could I work remote? And my boss at that point was like, totally. you know, he's like,
do it.
That's what
everyone's doing right
now.
He's like, 2020. What are you talking about?
Yeah. And we had our fifth child. And so he understood that too. Our fifth child was born in July of 2020. So it was like 3 or 4 months after the world shut down. Mm-hmm. We went to the hospital and had a baby. And thankfully I got to be there for the birth. But there were some stories of people that weren't there. Your story.
My story. So interject real quick.
Yeah.
Slater was born in May of 2020.
Yeah.
A week or at 39 weeks, we were notified that I was not going to be able to be in the room with Marissa during like her most needed time of this. And she was freaking out. She's like, "Are you kidding me? There's no way. There is no way. I'm not doing this."
Yeah.
There's like, sorry, no exceptions. He can wait in the parking lot, or, Then we went to like a birthing center, and they said, "Well, yes, but he has to wear like a space suit." Like, no joke, like just straight up like hazmat. She's like, "No, I'm not doing this."
Yeah.
She's 39 weeks pregnant. We talk about fresh courage. My wife pulls the biggest audible in history, and she calls a midwife.
Home birth.
Oh,
dude. Amazing.
She called a midwife, and I was very like not on board because I was working for a hospital at that time. I was like, I don't know, this is weird. Like, what are we doing? And she's like,
safety.
Look, we need to do what's right for us. So she called this midwife. Midwife comes over, and it was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had with this midwife that came and introduced herself to us and said, "We could do this."
Yeah.
I'm like, "You realize she's ready next week?" She's like, "I'm ready now. We could do this."
Amazing.
And long story short, it was one of the most profound and spiritual experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
Bringing in our son in our own home.
Yeah.
It was just powerful.
And we had quite a few friends that did the home birth thing, and it's the same kind of report, right? The same kind of story. It's amazing. Yeah, it's so cool.
Like, to the point where for us, if we were to have more, it's like, that's
for sure
what we're doing.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Because it was so amazing. So
beautiful.
So I want to go back to something that you said, and I think it's super important, especially for dads, for working dads that and even parents just in general, where we feel this immense pressure at work, and we get into this potentially fight or flight response.
Yeah. And
there's a couple of ways you could have gone about that experience, which is I'm gonna stay in that primal state, and okay, I'm gonna just try and find a new job. I'm gonna try and fix this. I'm gonna try and fix it.
Totally.
But instead, you're ever so loving and wife who is full of wisdom and patience and love and presence. I've met her one time, and the one time I met her, I could tell that she was just so intentional and had a lot of presence about her. And was very sure about who she is and what she does. And she reminded you of what was most important. And not only did she do that, but she did that with a smile on her face and looked at it as an opportunity for both of you guys. So, and then transitioning to that now, we are able to try and help other men to find that space.
Yeah.
I mean, how many men are we seeing now with Heare Brotherhood that are experiencing those very feelings that you felt?
Totally.
The very feelings that I've felt before.
Yep.
And quite frankly, sometimes still feel.
Yeah.
Right? It's incredible.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk about how, we transition into you doing some wellness retreats.
Yep.
In a couple minutes about the retreat we just did in Zion.
I mean, it is hard to summarize quickly because there was a lot of powerful things that we experienced together. We went to some deep places. I think though, what beyond the connections that we made with each other, which was awesome, right? That brotherhood and that like knowing that you're not alone and in whatever your situation is, whether you're successful, whatever, or you're kind of like, I'm not identifying as that. Like there were connections made across the board, however, whatever stage of life we were in, right? Beyond that connection, there was a very deep connection that was made internally with each person that was there, reconnecting with their true self, their true identity, that part of them that's always been there. Even that concept of the inner child that we talked about in Tai Chi and in some other instances. And that I think was one of what most people came away with, was that deeper sense of connection to self. And also just as important, maybe most important, is the connection to God or their higher power.
Yeah.
And I felt like we saw and felt that in abundance.
We did.
In that experience. Yeah.
We did. And I'll end with this. I just had my parents on, and my dad was sharing his thoughts on fresh courage. And he shared something pretty profound. He said, when I think of fresh courage, I think of keeping the courage I currently have fresh. And there's other people that need to generate their own fresh courage, new fresh courage, because it's run out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that the paradox of the two, and how the men that come to a Heare retreat, they can either be in their powerful state and they're just in abundance of power and they feel good and they're in the great place in their life, and they're
keeping the courage fresh by being there.
Courage fresh by being there, and they're sharing that energy with others.
Yeah.
And then there's others that we come potentially broken in many areas, and we need to regenerate some new fresh courage while we're there. So Mike, once again, your story is awesome. I love you as a brother, as a friend. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for everything that you have done for Heare, but more than anything, just being a friend, and I'm glad you came on today.
Thank you, brother. Love you too, man.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.